So as the last part of this lecture, I want to talk about the Bitcoin and Ethereum addresses so you understand where they're coming from. Because, so basically what the addresses are, they're derived from the public and private keys. Now, if you look at Bitcoin addresses, these are my two addresses from my Jax wallet that I used to show you a transfer in the last lecture. You see the Bitcoin address starts with a 1, and my Ethereum address starts with a 0x. And that's a pretty standard rule in that most Bitcoin addresses start with a 1. There's some other models for addresses, but most start with a 1, and most Ethereum addresses start with a 0x. So now, although this looks like a random set of characters and numbers, there's actually something deeper here, which is very systematic about these addresses, and I just want to give you a hint of where this is from. Now, if you recall, what we did is we did a lot with cryptography, and we started looking at prime numbers and so on and so forth. Now, what happens usually if you want to find an address is that it's created by your wallet on your behalf. So, what Bitcoin does, and the same for Ethereum, is that they basically use something called an elliptic curve algorithm, which starts by picking points on the curve. If we relate this to the RSA mechanism or algorithm that I talked before, is basically based on picking primes. Then it relates to the number E that you pick, and then you have a number D, which essentially is also the result of some picking of this other number K, right? So what essentially happens is that your wallet creates and finds all of these items for you. And then from those items, it creates your address. And it happens through a series of hashing operations mixed with adding some materials. Now, just if you're really keen, here's essentially how it works with Bitcoin. If you look at the addresses as we have it, so it starts with a private key that is created by not created, but it's actually found by picking these points on the elliptic curve. So it creates the private key and the public key. From those, what it does, it hashes the public key with SHA-256. Then it hashes that hash with the repeat 160 hash. Then it adds 2 zeros to it, takes the bit version of it, hashes this again, and then hashes that hash again, takes the first 8 digits, adds it to this particular hash, which starts with 2 leading zeros, which is then a binary address, and then creates an address from that binary address reversely by applying another function to it, and then you have this address which starts with the 1, and the 1 is essentially results of having added these 2 zeros here. All right, so it's very nerdy stuff, and you really don't have to understand all these details, but all I want to say is it's a very systematic process in how these addresses essentially are created. So it's not totally random. Ethereum addresses are essentially hexadecimal strings that always start with a 0 and X. Now, like Bitcoin, they do it also with an elliptic curve algorithm, but it does it a little simpler. What they do is they hash the public key with another hash operator, which is the SHA-256, that creates a 32-byte string. They drop the first 12 bytes so that they have 20 characters left. 20 bytes would be so you have about 40 characters left. And then they add the prefix 0x, and that is your Ethereum address. Now, this is not as crafty and finely crafted as a Bitcoin address, but what it is essentially is much more flexible. And in fact, what they're currently working on is to have a name service for that. And the critical part about it is that there's a project in Ethereum out there which tries to build Ethereum addresses, which essentially have the ability to interact with an IBAN number. That's the International Bank Account Number system that is commonly used, for instance, in Europe, and that makes transfers quite simple. And the hope is, of course, is that you can use the Ethereum address to directly interact with that wallet.